Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Jamestown Foundation this morning. I'm Peter Mattis, its president, and today's topic is the Chinese Communist Party's subnational influence building in United Front work. I think it's particularly pertinent today, given that in the news this week, the city of Edinburgh called off a potential partnership with the Taiwanese city of Kaohsiung, in part because the University of Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce, the Edinburgh Airport, possibly other organizations lobbied the city to say that this wasn't appropriate. It increased the risk of cyber attacks, and it might jeopardize the partnerships that these institutions had with counterparts in the People's Republic of China. And we have Ray Wang, who is the lead author of a great report on this sort of subnational issue in Germany about de-risking on the surface, re-risking underneath. But before I introduce all of the panelists, I just want to make a couple of quick points about United Front work and influence building that are worth remembering. It's very easy to get pedantic about the ways in which the party refers to different things, in part because the Chinese Communist Party has an aptitude, if you will, for parsing things in a variety of different ways. But United Front work is fundamentally about building political influence, building the connections to influence, and mobilizing those connections and relationships on behalf of the party. And it doesn't matter whether the people are inside the PRC or outside the PRC. The border that matters here is the party and everyone else. And as an activity and as a party activity, it's noteworthy that basically for the entire history of the party that they've referred to United Front work, which is, roughly a century at this point, they've always said that United Front work is the work of the entire party. And as a result, I think we should just think of this as an activity or a way of looking at the world, a kind of philosophy or theory of politics, and recognize that it's broad and encompassing, even as it is a very specific type of activity sometimes in the way that the party will describe it or describe related work in different ways. So, it's good to be accurate, but it's also good to recognize that this is really the underlying context and that we shouldn't beat ourselves up over not exactly getting every piece of this right. The second thing is that I know that the United Front Work Department is going to come up today, possibly in questions, possibly elsewhere. But we often think of this, or what people refer to as the United Front Work Department, is sometimes the central level, but it's also a whole system that exists wherever the party is. So all 31 provinces have a United Front Work Department attached to the provincial committee. Almost every locality has one attached to the party committee. The China Academy of Sciences, which has a party committee to run it, has a United Front Work Department. Boao Steel and China Mobile have United Front Work Departments attached to them, to their party committee. And even Western businesses that have party committees inside them, inside their PRC or Hong Kong operations, might even have a United Front Work Department there. So it's a sprawling apparatus. And again, we should just recognize that sometimes these things are happening at the central level, sometimes they're happening at provincial level, and sometimes they're happening in places that we never would have expected it to be. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists today. Again, the first is Ray Wang, who is the chair of Freiheit für Hong Kong in Germany. I think you can read his bio. He was one of the first to really sort of popularize localism in Hong Kong, and I think I first met him during the Hong Kong protests of 2019 here in Washington D.C. And I would say that I think Ray is probably one of the first Hong Kongers to really see what was happening and how the party was operating, and to try to say, stop, this is our city. And as a result, he unfortunately is also the first political exile from the city as well, I think. So congratulations, Ray, on the report, and we look forward to hearing about it. It'll be good to see you in person again sometime soon. For discussants today, we have our newest fellow at the Jamestown Foundation, Cheryl Yu. She was the author of a great China brief piece last week on the Chinese People's Association for friendly foreign contact or friendship with foreign countries, and its subnational diplomacy in the United States, even 4 years, I think 4.5 years after the warning from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about how the CCP was looking and evaluating governors and state leaders to see who could be cultivated. And last, we have Didi Kirsten-Tatlow, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a correspondent for Newsweek. And she's been a longtime China correspondent. Again, you can read her bio and you have it. But I would just comment that she's had an eye for detail in everyday life that gave her a view into how the CCP operated that I think few have, and an ability to make it tangible in a way that you don't get from desk research. And on more than a few occasions, when I thought of an interesting question or an interesting topic, I found a piece that Didi had written for the New York Times or elsewhere, where I said, well, I've got to give this up because I can't write it as well as that. So without further ado, Ray, if you provide the opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you, Peter, for your kind introduction. And I also wish to see you soon in person in DC again. Yeah, as Peter said, we just recently published a report on China's subnational diplomacy in Germany. And we specifically take the angle to investigate how China, PRC to be precise, strategically exploits the German federal system to expand and exert its illiberal influence in Germany. So all started actually last year, June, when the German government published its first ever China policy, in which the German government states that they welcome pan and regional twinning initiative with China because this served as one of the key pillars of the Sino-German relations. And as a Hong Konger, our city was eroded by CCP agents, was infiltrated by the party state system for decades. And we know how CCP covered United Front operations, the significance of CCP United Front work. And we know that the fall of Hong Kong didn't happen just in 2019. CCP was planning it over the decades. They infiltrate every sectors of the society, plan their people in Zhou Enlai's own terms. This is called the 白蚁政策, termite policy. They send people in every sectors in huge quantity. When the time comes, everything just got up to the surface to work for them. So when we see the China strategy, we already smell something fishy, and we know that CCP definitely would make use of this kind of city diplomatic relationship. So we started this research and to look at the legal and institutional framework of for conducting city diplomacy in Germany and also in China. And then we see a huge structural imbalance here because on the German side, they conduct city diplomacy in a very decentralized, autonomous way. So basically, municipal government has their own power to decide with whom and whether they establish international partnerships. And in most of the cases, the state and the federal governments know almost nothing about their relationship, what kind of activities they are doing. In our report, we showcases two examples, the Bavarian government and the North Rhine-Westphalia government, when they were asked whether they know what kind of activities their municipalities are doing with their Chinese counterparts. They replied, no, because this is out of our competency. So without a state government and the federal government oversight, a lot of this kind of activities are basically hiding in the shadow. We don't know what kind of activities are there. And also, according to the German laws, when engaging with international partners for subnational diplomacy, there are basically no regulations as long as they don't do activities that will infringe national foreign policy and objective. But this is very vague. So basically, they only have a negative obligations as long as they don't violate the national interests or national foreign policy. They could do whatever they want. And in terms of the institutional structure, we know in China, everything is very well coordinated, very centralized. I know Cheryl just published a wonderful report on the CPA-FFC. That is one of the key organs coordinating subnational diplomacy on the Chinese side. But on the German side, they have a few institutions, but municipal authorities have the power to decide whether they want to join this kind of initiative. And also, this kind of institutions are more of representations of municipal and city governments. They don't really coordinate, and they don't really organize events for municipalities and cities to engage in foreign relations. So on the German side, there is basically no regulations, almost no structure for overseeing and coordinating subnational diplomacy. But on the Chinese side, as I mentioned, the CPA-FFC was one of the key organs, but also in their laws, they state very, very clearly that what are the roles of all the Chinese citizens, entities, local government, party members, what are their roles when it comes to international engagement. So we know Xi Jinping considers himself as a big thinker. So he published a lot of philosophy, like Xi Jinping's thoughts on diplomacy, in which he also states very clearly the role of the party in all the foreign engagement or the diplomatic activities. And in 2018 March, Xi Jinping elevated the position of the Central Foreign Affairs Committee above the MFA. So again, another incident showing how Xi Jinping wanted to re-centralize all the diplomatic activities and engagements of the PRC party states. And as all the city partnerships are overseen by the CPA-FFC, and the CPA-FFC is overseen by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is controlled by the Central Foreign Affairs Committee of the CCP. We could see in this structure how the CCP top-level design works. So the top level gives the directive, and then it goes through every level of the party side, and every actors involved in diplomacy has to execute the order and concretize the directive. And in another law, foreign relations law, it actually also highlights the positive obligations of every local authority and citizens to advance national interests. This is a huge difference from other to collaborate with them. And we know trying to collaborate with them. So under this legal and institutional framework, all the engagements with any Chinese officials, or even what they call the civil, be genuine people-to-people connections. Maybe at first they were innocent. They really had age with foreign authorities, but at some point when they got close enough with may be forced to collaborate with Chinese intelligence service and also accept the positive obligation to advance the national interest. So in the case of Germany, promoting the Belt and Road initiative and also to neutralize potential critics, the advancement of their agenda. We could see in the case of Duisburg, the first city partnership with the Chinese city, Wuhan. It was established in 1980 in the very broken state because of the transformation of the area from industrial, where a lot of the unemployment rate was very high. So at that time, when we need your know-how and we could offer you different opportunities, it seems almost already 40 years. Now Duisburg calls itself Germany's. In this city, we also see a huge network of China sympathizers who are and also to lobby the federal government for Chinese interests. And I think I would stop here and I'm looking forward to our discussion later.
Thank you very much, Ray, for that presentation of your report and the issue conceptual frame for understanding that we have a central government and central guidance. Our systems are in fact decentralized and have negative obligations, more or less free. And I believe it was just on Weibo in the last couple of weeks that we got down the MSS on the Ministry of State Security on the intelligence law, which is failing to lend assistance, that you can get an administrative penalty of any other due process, simply someone from the MSS with a badge saying you didn't help me. So off you go. For some thoughts on the report and on what Ray has had to say.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so I want to start by highlighting a good point. Subnational diplomacy that is decentralized in Germany, but for the PRC, it's a top-down approach. A real city-to-city level partnership, and it's top-down, and that the direction, including from Xi Jinping himself. And I think the problem for this is that a German city for the city and will be discussing terms based on this city level thinking, which makes sense or in partnership with other democratic countries. But because this other side is the Chinese Communist Party, the city representative would be, although he seems to be like just representing the city, but he would be thinking about the direction would benefit the party objective and not just the city itself. And I think this situation is not just focal level cooperation, including like for university level and other like people to people is representing the Chinese side would be thinking about the party goal. For example, like how to bring technology back to that the party would have access to critical technologies in the foreign country in the future. So before they head into any kind of collaboration, because the party is using them as tools to reach its goals, and even individuals, whether forced or voluntary, are there to serve the party and its needs. Regarding the situation and implication for the United States, I think very similar situation is partnerships and like Confucius Institute and other that's mentioned in the report. So I think the lessons from federal and local governments face very similar challenges. In the US, it seems that in general, people at the federal level are more aware of what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing and its overall objective. Like mentioned in the report, CPA FFC in 2020. And then another example would be that the Select Committee was established between the Chinese Communist Party and the United States. But I think the problem here is that although affect much on how state and local officials deal with the Chinese Communist Party's local level outreach. He facilitates the meetings between Guangdong government and Hong Kong and Macau government with California government. Example are like I think late last year there was this China-US 20 US counties and city officials attended. Through local residents, and they can seem very genuine from this from local government, like what's going on. These people can seem like just like normal local residents who are making these connections are in fact part of the United Front groups or the network by the party. And I think to support my point, I took a quick look at mentioned in a report. And it appears that there's this particular woman in have been facilitating the collaborations between the two cities for years, including an offensive initiative that's mentioned in the report. And she happens to be this director of the chair to Beijing's People's Political Consultative Conference, which they are all part of the United Front. State and local officials, whether in the US or in Germany, to understand that the Chinese community, and by hijacking here, I mean that politicians usually look to community groups for to reach its voters, and assuming that they are operating in good faith, are in fact pushing the government in the direction the party prefers. And I think I'll stop here, and I look forward to the.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. And just a reminder to the attendees, you can put questions. We'll take those questions and toss them to the panelists to have a little.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. And that's just really terrific. And I wanted to say, because it's so vital that we get here in Europe and also in the US and in other places such as Cheryl's, who really have this sort of granular biographical understanding of the situation about what's going on, because what we have otherwise in Europe is sort of European offense to anyone at all, but simply that depth of knowledge isn't there, and I think that that's a healing with China. So I think that Peter mentioned initially the situation in Edinburgh, where urgently warning against Edinburgh exercising its ability, which is its own, to have a situation, and we'll see what happens there. I know that there's some pushback already in Scotland. And I also don't get too pedantic about United Front stuff. I think this is really vital. Of course, we need to differentiate stuff works, but we have to remember again that from the point of view of the CCP in China, I mean, United Front is really, that is an internal one that is focusing on outreach to everything outside. Think about this as an overall activity and frame of mind almost, and not just a sort of a technical, holistic sort of analysis, although that has its place too. I think Germany is a local issue. I mean, this goes way back. One could even go back before World War I, if you like. I mean, some of these also in Taiwan, and great amounts of studies of students going to Germany from Taiwan, for example, things like that, but also philosophy, really very, the core of Europe, if you like. And of course, Germany is a special place, a wonderful place, but it's very federal. And so power is quite dispersed. And what we don't see in Germany, and example you had in the US in 2020 when Pompeo came out and gave his speech to the governors and said, no, that's here. So then we get into all the details and the sort of the complexities is in terms of the language that we need to describe these situations. Essentially, the CCP's sort of sister province, also sister port, shipping port relationships are fantasies. Ray highlights that very well in detail why that is so, and Cheryl does this work too. Not trying to go and play a game of something on a court with someone and they turn up and they start playing tennis and you're playing badminton. It's not going to be a great game. So, that's why, because what we engage in is what I would call, this mirroring. We mirror ourselves onto others, doing it politically too. So I think that the one very delicate in Ray's Freiheit für Hong Kong report is also that, people may say, well, so what? We're making, it's not just to do with the political inroads made into our societies in the ability to manipulate us, who are often appealed to on a very narrow kind of elite channel that we cannot see in the public, going to certain sectors, scientists, politicians, businessmen, that we have no insight into front, all of party, all of sort of CCP activity. But that's the issue. Does absolutely directly impact on people living in democracies, because they are suddenly faced with sort of beliefs what's going on. There have been these stories of people being offered to security ostensibly because they are being threatened by these kinds of working on this, pushing the CCP political agenda, the manipulation and the threats, what the United Front thinking is. So there's a really direct that, I would just close by saying that I hope that there can be a revision of the China strategy, and that this one detail, which is, I believe, only one paragraph in something like a 60-page documentary when it came out last year, I just was so struck by how fundamentally important, how much anyone had really understood what was going on to the structure of the party and how it operates around the world. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for those remarks, all three of you. We've got a few questions in the chat, so I'll put my questions to the side, and hopefully we'll get some more to Didi and Ray. Is that historically Germany was a victim of communism during the Cold War, particularly pleasant, and certainly East Germany has a, and yet, especially when you compare, say, the experience of Czechia, analyzed and understood communism, why does it seem that Germany has this low level of caution when engaging with China?
Ray, do you want to go
maybe I will start, and Didi could correct. It has something to do with their historical view of the fall of Berlin Wall, and also what led to Paul Willy Brandt, one of the SPD, I think, the third chancellor after this. The West Germany deployed a policy that completely broke. But Willy Brandt introduced the Ostpolitik, a rapprochement policy to countries, and through this kind of rapprochement policies, there were more peace, and they believe these connections facilitate the fall of the Berlin Wall of Germany. That's why even after the end of Cold War, their general foreign policy direct has always been engagement policy, rapprochement policy. We could see it in with Russia. It's called Wandel durch Handel, transform through trade. Transform through trade. Building economic and ties with an authoritarian country at all levels, and totalitarian states to a quasi more open society. When Xi Jinping came to power, after Deng opened those policies, we see until as I said, 2012. But after 2012, Germany was my work. So they didn't really reveal their China strategy, their China policy. It was 2020 when the protests in Hong Kong broke out. They realized China was CCP to be. And in 2020, they realized how dependent they are. So it was only till 2020 they started to, because the dependency was already established. And now, even though they know they want dependency on China's markets, but it couldn't just happen overnight. So now the buzzword, China has already built up a huge network of sympathizer and supporter show change, a substantive change. We need to first go through and network of supporter. So yeah, that's the reason why Germany has this concern.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Just before I add some points to yours, I just want to clarify, in case for those who have, I'm referring, of course, to the fact that they wholeheartedly support the creation of sister cities. It's, I think, unfortunate. I realize the document was a product of compromise, but nevertheless, perhaps they could have just ignored it, which is an unfortunate thing here, because people will point to it and say, look, let's just do more of this stuff. Germany's rather misplaced confidence in the effectiveness of its own Ostpolitik, clearly, but that it sort of brought down the Berlin Wall by basically making friends with East Germany. Or there was something out there called the United States, which was doing an awful lot on a far higher level. That's the story here in Germany. That's the belief. And so that's absolutely crucial. That China being far away and famously out of sight, out of mind, is a thing. Apologists in Germany, like it was everywhere, and a lot of them were very, very kind of hardcore left wing. They came out some of that to China, and they had, they really dominated the academies here, and they are regularly, in their opinion, is sought after by many people. So we have a tradition of that here, a powerful capitalism, that's clear. East Germany, West Germany, that was the Cold War, and that party in West Germany who went to China, who lived there, who stayed there, that's a fairly big deal. I think under activities back in West Germany. And I think also one thing to point out that will perhaps not make me mass some circles, but I think it's academically solid and observationally solid infiltration here in Germany by Russia, going to very high levels, and why the lack of why didn't German history kind of inoculate, if you like, Germans more in the way that it did that's a big deal, this infiltration, and it's been very much, how should I put it? It's a real thing. And I think of course, the business lobby is another point, very powerful, trade, push all the time. And a very final tiny point, I think also, let's not forget the role of the communist time, DDR, the former very successful long-term Chinese ambassador to Germany, his embassy in East Berlin, I think from 1972, when he was just a stripling, 18 years old or something like this, diplomacy. So you're talking like old networks, and then East Germany, they merged with West Germany, and those networks didn't die. So
I have a question from Kathleen Markey about in the German system. This has been a debate since, I think, really 20 in systems, smart city systems that are coming from us in such a way that it almost feels like a feature rather than a bug. And an installation of those technologies, the way that they move forward. Can you see and the debate and discussion in Germany about how to use telecom for computing, or is there an overlap between?
Yeah, again, maybe I will start. So in our report, we also Chinese telecom companies build their influence or build their business type relationships. One example is Kern. So Kern in our report was called authority. Yet the biggest telecommunications company in Kern also signed strategic partnership with, if I remember it correctly, it should be some separate agreement with Huawei. So as I said, collaborations between local company and Chinese companies, city government, and also therefore through their city diplomacy, and so resources to directly engage with company at the local politics. Like 2 years ago, when CDU, the annual conference in West North Rhine-Westphalia. Huawei were being sponsored for different parties' annual conference in various regions. So they actually put more effort at the local level than directly.
Yeah, I don't know, Cheryl, do you want to add something?
I think I'm a little bit more familiar with the kind of like the situation in the United States. So so
I would support what Ray says comes to these subnational influencing or interference issues. It's not just politics, but also academies. And there is increasingly some attention on that here in Germany. Some German journalists are starting to uncover things that included, started publishing on many years ago, back in 2019. And the scale and the reality of what they haven't understood until now in terms of exerting pressure. Frankfurt, nominally headquartered in Frankfurt, that's the Federation of Chinese Professional Associate Annual Conference in a European capital. And they're very, very quick on the politics. I think it was in Manchester to sort of game that one out, and the next one was in Dublin. And I think that this also speaks to the issue of how, with these situations, that the CCP side, the China side, comes with great capacities, and they will come and they'll be like 10 from some far smaller European country, and they're just overwhelmed. Not only is it a numbers amount, who should they send in order to make the right kind of connection to their opposite number? This when the Uyghur issue, the issue of the what was happening till 17, 18, and the China side would, come up with these sort of spokespeople organizations, obviously, sometimes, often, not always. Sometimes they were from the government. And it would be a woman, like appeal to the West, this sort of democratic principles, gender issue would be somebody who really looks very sort of Western, like a Uyghur, who looks like a foreigner of some kind. So that's something also to be aware of.
So we have a variety of questions that I think come down to a very is what are the specific harms that you think of these relationships at the subnational level?
Yeah, should I just briefly say something about that? I think the set up a connection with the very interesting Taiwan city of Kaohsiung is a perfect example of the harm. Now, the population of Australia, why on earth shouldn't Edinburgh set up a relation, if you like, interests of the city, sovereign, it's within their political autonomy and these people, why should people be ignored like this? That's one very definite harm. Another very definite harm would be people of Chinese origin amongst us, and not just people of Chinese origin, whatever, that's going to mean, system, as being hostile, being an enemy, which is exactly what the United Front does. It identifies the loss of the ability for autonomous decision-making on our part, whether in a community or in a
I think I can add on to like the harm thing. So because local level, these aspects, including what Edie just said, and also an example is like also on education, because they try to local governments and where they also trickle down to university or school partnership. And one example, I was like on the metro and someone just started talking to me, a high school student, actually Chinese, and which is pretty good, I think. But on the other hand, he also like started to say, I think construction, that's really great, and infrastructure, and he hopes that can be like in the United States. So I'm sure of this kind of connections made so that it wouldn't have more effect to like next generation and to the public.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Didi and Cheryl just said. Maybe I would just add on national diplomatic relations. harmed Germany's national security. One is the sale of the Hamburg port to Costco. So a lot of eyes showed, despite all the objections from the head of the intelligence cabinet members, still insist to sell the Hamburg port to Costco because Scholz's background and subnational diplomacy. Before Scholz became in Hamburg for 7 or 8 years. 8 years. And in that period of time, he Shanghai, and so in that period of time, he traveled to China many times. We don't know what deal they made. We don't know, but I think this is an educated speculation that to Costco had something to do with his time in Hamburg. Use of city relationships to cultivate a network of supporters. At some point when they become a federal politician, when they get into really important doing to advance Chinese interests, are obviously harming the national interests of Germany and academic freedoms. So a lot of time when a city government, it also comes, it's a package deal. It also comes with the collaboration agreement between the, and once they establish sister university agreement, what comes is or the agreement, the collaboration agreement with the China Scholarship Council, CSC, and revealing the problems of CSC students because Chinese students have to regularly report to the Chinese embassy, and what they are reporting, we don't know, but if the Chinese national interests, they may receive punishments of the Chinese surveillance system to monitor other Chinese students. I am with CSC. When I talk with other Chinese students, they are afraid because, first of all, they sense that they are talking with me, and I ask them whether they are afraid even not talking to me. Or CSC students, they all have this fear because obviously CSC students behavior back to the Chinese embassy. So it's an indirect way to in countries. And the third point I would like to make is how China limits the autonomy of other look up for human rights. In our report, we cited a regulation from the national diplomacy, in which it states very clearly that when they encounter any sensitive issue, Taiwan religious issue, they have to report back to their superior, and then their superior will decide what to. For example, a German local authority raised issue of human rights. Some come back from their Chinese counterpart, and maybe the Chinese to pressure on their business leader, on their local leader to ask them not of Heidelberg is a very good example. So the Chinese representative going to establish a tie with Taiwan, so they pressurize the business community government to infringe their autonomy, their freedom, and their principles. So China, through subnational diplomacy, exerts influence and harm. These three examples are already very.
Well, thank you very much for those answers. And the obvious question that protestations that they don't interfere in domestic affairs. And a couple of months ago, with Liu Zhenchao, the head of the International Department of Interference in U.S. internal affairs or other countries, and his response. So one could say that we are justifying the interference for Hong Kong, all of us, simply because we were discussing this question to affect us. And I want to take just a little prerogative. There's a question. And I think the most important thing to remember about these United Front networks is that this can access. So there's a network of relationships, and if there's an effort to acquire a specific they can turn to these United Front networks to help spot and assess back to the PRC or bringing expertise back, or if they need to collect intelligence, if they need to bring it back for strategic purposes. So in some ways, I like to say that the United Front is like the tall grass, not just a jungle, it's not just an accident, but it's being deliberately cultivated to hide the nefarious activity. But I want to ask one last question that I think is an important one to go around, which to push back, to protect ourselves, to raise our game in
I will start first. In our reports, we recommend the key recommendation use legislation to give power to the federal government to oversee subnational. There is already a similar legislation in the US, also in Australia, but European countries. And I think for the US and Australia, as they already have this PRC's illiberal expansion of illiberal influence, is very Western politicians still understand their relationship with Chinese officials through their own lens for how PRC operates. And I think that
to add on what Ray just said, I also think so besides like making legislation, I think that direct and immediate effect on these like relationship and but I think what's more important, like policymakers and local and state officials, to make sure that they really understand the problem and not just on the surface or from the Congress, because receiving this kind of like an example is United States had this like NDAA where was shut down in the US, but if a local and state government like offers another way to still like maintain this kind of relationship, but it's maybe in another name or under sure that our policymakers understand why we are doing this and why it is.
Yeah, and for my ad, I would a little bit connect the question about what should be done to push back. I think that the one thing that we see is that the United Front and its systems in our society, whether in academia, whether scientists, whether politicians, whether business people, whether, women's groups, anything, difficult for people outside, say a journalist such as myself or a researcher, to look into and there are others, the so-called China Bridge, where they've done exactly that, where they don't publish all the names of their talks at the Düsseldorfer Industrie Club, the Industrial Club of Düsseldorf, for example. And so what we need then is again, this is me perhaps speaking as a journalist, but just an awareness on the side of people in our own societies that you do need to talk to the public, because otherwise, that sort of fundamental point about democracy, which is an informed public, that's what's going on. We can't actually tell the broad public in our democracies what is actually happening. Don't talk themselves because they've got these vested interests at this point. Now, this isn't something that one can. The CCP is very, very good at manipulating it and exploiting systems. So I would say far greater reporting, please, and much more transparency, including from ourselves.
We look forward to your next piece, Dee. So I just want to say thank you. It's a tour de force, really, around all levels of the United Front system and the harms on the big report release. And I hope it lands well and that you can today. We really appreciate your time. I hope you found this informative and worthwhile and in the days and weeks ahead.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
good day.